Monday morning data chat. Today we have Pardhu, Gunnam, and Marslan, both from Metaphor. If you're tuning in from LinkedIn, especially, I think you'll get a kick out of these guys' story about building a data catalog at LinkedIn. So let's get started here. What's up, guys? How's it going?
Hey, Joe. Nice to chat with you again.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Thanks for having us on your show, Joe.
Anytime. It's always a joy talking to you guys. So, cool. So, what do you, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure, I can start with I'm Pardhu. I'm CEO and co-founder of Metaphor, and me and Mars together collaborated and built a metadata team at LinkedIn, and we created DataHub, which is the most popular open source project. And with all the success around the project and awareness around like the data catalogs and the interest in building solutions around metadata platforms, we stepped out last year, November, and created Metaphor. And we also released our product, like went live 3 weeks ago, and
Cool.
it's a primarily focused on search and discovery. But we are excited to talk more about the product and the platform.
That's awesome. I mean, for people who aren't quite aware, I'm starting to see data catalogs popping up more and more. I mean, they've always kind of been around. Data governance has been around for ages. I guess for people who aren't familiar with, well, we'll step back. Talk about data governance real quick. You guys got into a data governance team at LinkedIn a while ago. What is data governance, and then what was that experience like?
Okay, I can take a stab at that. So data governance is actually a very broad term. So it covers a lot of things, and different people mean different things. But the sort of the data governance aspect that we covered at LinkedIn, including obviously the big compliance/privacy part of it. GDPR was actually a big deal at LinkedIn at the time. So that was obviously it. So including basically access, and privacy compliance and whatnot. But quickly, it also get into some people even lump lineage, right, end-to-end lineage into governance and saying that's helping people finding provenance of data sets and dashboards and whatnot. So that is also obviously a big part of DataHub at LinkedIn as well. But then there's also another aspect of data governance when people talk about it is like, how do I make sure my thing don't grow organically and grow out of control? That right? When people talk about that, I basically think about, you want to have some system to control things, right? And there will be like one definition for the companies and et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the other side of the governance. And we actually have plenty of those inside of LinkedIn as well. The funny story there is we had a system called UMP, Unified Metrics Platform, which is, you can think of it as a metric store, if you will, right, in the lingo outside of LinkedIn. But it was so successful, it became a problem in and of itself because we ended up having, how many do we end up having? 30,000 metrics or something like that? Some crazy number.
30,000 metrics.
Yes. And that is obviously the results of organic growth, right? No company is going to have 30,000 metrics, right? It doesn't make any sense. And then later on, at some point, people start realizing, hey, look, we enable a self-serve platform, but actually it turns into a monster. We got so many things that are inconsistent and all that. And that's when the governance piece come in. People start saying, wait a second, we don't really have 30,000 metrics, right? We should have 300, not 30,000. So DataHub definitely play a big role in that as well inside of LinkedIn, trying to help people to surface up, what is unique, what is the thing that should be official, certified, how are they computed, how are the other things that are derivative of those, et cetera, et cetera.
Interesting. I'm still blown away by a 30,000 metric thing. That's nuts. I mean, walk me through that, because you mentioned this word organic growth. In this case, I don't think that organic is great in the way that like organic vegetables are great.
Well, actually, that's funny. Depending on who you ask, organic can be both good and bad, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's like anything. If you take it to the extreme, it's bad always. If you have complete control, complete governance, guess what? There's zero productivity because nobody gets to do anything at all, right? And if you get the other extreme, like, hey, free for all, do whatever you want, everybody do everything, then you end up having complete organic growth. So it's always kind of a fine balance. How do you make sure that there is enough freedom to enable people to really like self-serve and democratize data, but at the same time, it's not democratizing into a car crash, right? A train wreck. Right? You want to make sure that it's democratizing in a way that actually moved the whole company forward rather than backward.
So walk me through this. I mean, at LinkedIn, what was going on with data governance before you guys decided to create DataHub?
I think every interesting aspects was like there was metrics teams, there were experimentation teams, and like data set, like data lake teams. Like there was sorts of governance kind of implemented in those local teams. Like yeah, so those things worked fine within those environments, but like people also started seeing that the connected governance aspects coming around, like, hey, whatever represented in the data sets has an impact in the downstreams, like metrics and experiments, or like dashboarding systems. Like, how do you connect these governance systems across? So kind of like necessitated like a lot of repeated elements of governance in a common place, like DataHub. Right?
Actually, there's a couple of interesting comments on the thread. I don't know if we want to take time to answer those, or do we want to wait till the end?
I mean, we can take time to address some of these things.
Okay, I'm trying to read some of these.
And for full disclosure, Ternary Data is a partner with Elation as well. So just throwing that out there. But I think that these are questions I think that a lot of users have, and part of the purpose of the show is to sort of highlight, what technologies, just what's out there, really, right? And like how do you compare and contrast? So I think this is fair. Anything you want to address in particular?
Sure. So I mean, obviously, that's not talk about Elation specifically. I think that's not the point, right? I think the point is a lot of company, actually, funny enough, including LinkedIn as well, spend a lot of effort into building their own catalog, right? Actually, if you search data catalog on Medium, you probably find like, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 examples of companies trying to do that. We actually had a pretty good blog post that we put out probably a couple of weeks back on our website. You can probably find it. It's called where to find my data, right? Essentially, how to find the data that I want. It's kind of really part of it is sort of explain the journey that we ourselves went through at LinkedIn as well. I think most of these catalog fell for actually a surprisingly simple reason. It's kind of just bad product, if you want to summarize it, right? And when by that, I don't mean like it's a bad technical tool, right? In fact, generally it's because they're so good at technical side of the story, they kind of overlook the human side or organizational side of the story. I think the catalog, catalog ultimately is some tool that someone used in the company, right? It's not some program that try to, drive decision based off of the catalog. It's always a human side of the story there. And what we discovered is, yes, you need technical metadata. You need to be able to grab the schema. You need to be able to grab the lineage. You need to be able to grab all the history, et cetera, from various systems and put it into one place and surface that up. But that in and of itself is not enough to solve the search and discovery problem. You kind of need two more pieces, in our opinion, right? One is the business metadata, okay? Because just because you have a column called cus_ID, what does that really mean, right? Or if you have a column called revenue, what does that really mean for business, right? Is that the same understanding of revenue in business term, or is it just some intermediate value that need to be transformed 100 times before we get to the actual revenue term that the finance department talk about? Right? So that sort of disconnect between pure technical metadata versus what you're trying to achieve in business is what actually turned a lot of people off with one of these two, because they say, oh yes, I get to see everything, but really nothing makes sense to me, right? Because from my perspective, I just want to know which one is the official dashboard to use to find my revenue, or I want to know what's the query that somebody wrote that I can leverage and quickly make sense, quickly achieve what I want to achieve, right? You don't need to spare me the glory detail of the full lineage that goes all the way from here to Salesforce. That I really don't care. I just need to know if this is the right thing I need to use to unblock me. So that is the second piece, which is business metadata. And then the third piece, in our opinion, which is behavior metadata, right? So essentially is how people are actually using the data in your environment. And this is actually very critical because we actually spend several months talking to more than 100 companies across different industry and data leaders in those companies and whatnot. The funny thing is, a lot of time what we heard is people saying that, hey, look, you can tell me the data quality, you can tell me all these things, right? Okay, where this data was from and all that. All I care is who's using it, and can I trust that person, right? Because I place more trust on the people than whatever you show me. And a lot of time, if this is used by the rock star of our data team, that's good enough for me, right? As a starting point, right? Of course, I probably do my due diligence afterward, but that is basically my first filter to say, should I even trust this thing? And then how are they using it obviously also matters, right? Are they using it for the same similar use case as me, or is it something completely different? So that behavior metadata is extremely important to surface it up. And that sometimes you can get it from systems, sometimes you cannot, right?
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that you surface that whole picture up for the people in order for them to search and find the thing that they need? And that's why I think most of these attempts inside a company fail. Because most of the time it's done by a bunch of engineers, and the engineer care only about the technical side of the story, and they say,
yeah,
we got it up and running, it's easy, I have a search engine, everything's done, right? Great.
Yeah, I mean, I built versions of data catalogs before, as well as I think the good old standby, the data dictionary, right? So that ends up being a page where you just define certain things, and when I look at the number of hits that the page would get, it's usually me and my team updating it usually. So
yeah,
that shows you how pervasive
typical.
it is. It's very typical.
And actually also on that data dictionary, there's actually also a very super important aspect to it as well. Should it exist? Oh, absolutely. You need to have that definition, right? But will people actually use it? No. Why are they not using it? It's because who's going to go to a separate page to look up that definition when they're in the middle of working on their notebook or look at dashboard or whatnot, right? You want to be able to surface those information up where they are, not they have to remember, oh, I need to go to this weird URL in order to find the thing that we have. But if you are able to do that, embed all that metadata right into the workflow where they are, that's going to be super valuable to them. Right? Nobody's going to dispute that we need to have a dictionary, we need to have definition and all that. It's just that thing is not readily available to me, so I just don't use it. That's kind of.
I find these tools are a lot. A lot of these attempts are very high friction as well for business users.
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of like telling people they need to floss their teeth, as I always say, right? Or like adopt good hygiene practices.
Organic vegetable again.
Right. You need to eat organic vegetables. And you should do these things, and the chance of you actually doing them, I don't know, man. I mean, the proofs in the usage, right? And so I mean, how much when you're starting with DataHub? I mean, actually, I do remember there was a predecessor, I think, called Warehouse.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember checking that out. That was way back in the day.
It's probably 5-6 years ago at this point, I think.
That's awesome. But the reason for that was finding a good data catalog tool, especially back then. It was way harder than it is now. There's what did you have? You had your expensive incumbent solutions, Warehouse. I can't really think of what you could. I think you could roll your own, and that seems to be sort of the default for a lot of teams. It's like, well, I'm an engineer, I can make a data catalog. How hard is it? It's a form.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
I actually let me add like a little bit, right? The whole idea around like which is exactly the journey which we went through as well, right? The problem stayed the same, like the data discovery, the data collaboration around like what is the right data to use, right? And people chose, interestingly, including us, like data catalog as the solution, as a starting point, right? But the interesting question is like, just data catalog, can it solve the problem, or does it need to be evolved like more than being a data catalog plus data dictionary plus a governance solution plus a business aspect of the things? The answer is yes, right? Like, so that's how, though we kind of categorize ourselves as a data catalog solution, actually that's because of the whole traditional history of like how data catalogs were used for solving this problem. But essentially what you need is a bit of a metadata platform with the right product around search and discovery, right? So that's where it's going.
I mean, when I checked out DataHub as well, and it struck me as being a lot more than just a data catalog. Like, it's not your traditional data catalog at all, right? It felt it felt very modern. It felt metadata was a big thing that stood out to me as well. Like that is, and based upon some other talks I've had with, other people in the space. Metadata is, I think, the direction where a lot of things. It's funny because metadata has been around forever, but I think it's becoming a first-class citizen in a lot of architectures and orchestration frameworks. Whereas back in the day, it was like, well, metadata, sure, we capture it. I don't know how you use it, but we got it in case you ever need to use it, which will never happen because you won't use it. So, because there was high friction getting to it.
Right. No, there's actually a lot of good analogy to be made here, but let me clarify a little bit first, right? So to us, DataHub is a metadata platform, right? It happened to have some sort of search and discovery interface and all that, which is all great and good, but it is a platform first, right? And then that's actually our approach at LinkedIn as well. We quickly realized, hey, look, this whole metadata thing has many legs, right? Search and discovery is just one of the many legs it has. So we should build a platform first. We don't build a point solution for each of these things. We build a platform, and then you can build solution on top, right? And that's kind of the whole premises of DataHub. And then it is a great metadata platform, probably in my opinion, because we created it. It's the best out there, right, so to speak, in terms of open source.
Right.
But I think a very good analogy to be drawn here is probably people forgot. There was actually one point where people think it's a bad idea to centralize data in the lake or warehouse. I don't know if anyone remember that time. People are asking questions, why do we want to do this again? Why do you want to pull all these things from your transactional database into one place? Why don't you just do it there? Why don't you just do your join there, right? Why do you want to do it here? And obviously now nobody ever asked that question, right? So metadata is kind of exactly in that phase, if you think about it, right? People say, hey, look, I have valuable metadata on my hand. I don't know what to do with it, like you said, right? I mean, maybe something useful will come out of it. But as soon as you actually centralize into one place, all of a sudden you can open up so many use cases that you previously didn't think even is possible, right? Because now, like data, you can join customer data with transaction data. Now you can join, data set metadata along with, maybe machine learning model metadata and all that. Then all of a sudden you open up all these other use cases. So that is why the platform piece is essential. And that's our approach with Metaphor as well, right? We build, in our opinion, the best in class metadata platform out there. But the thing is, nobody want to buy a platform. People want to buy things that solve their solution, right? So the very first thing that we built that immediately solve people's pain point is this search and discovery product. But that is not the whole thing about the company. Actually, that is, if you will, it's almost like essentially a little piece of the iceberg, right? Whatever you see above the water, so to speak.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess you got a question here. Petrie asks, has someone got a good guide for setting up data catalog and asset management for business IT and data? So does anyone know of a good guide for setting up a...
I think, so obviously we're gonna be biased and say, hey, look, use us. that's our default answer there. But I think there's some truth to it in a sense, once again, looping back to what I mentioned before. If you only care about one use case, and you think, hey, I only care about asset management, right? So I want to find a solution to solve asset management. You can actually find a plenty. There's gonna be plenty of solutions out there, open source or not, proprietary or not, you got plenty, right? But what we're saying is like, you don't buy a data lake just for one use case, right? You buy a data lake because you know it's going to enable you with all these other use cases later down the track. Right. Similarly, with us or any metadata platform, it's the same reason as well. Yes, you might have immediate pain point on this particular use case. That doesn't mean that your company will never have other pain points later down the track, right? So you can choose to buy point solution just to solve that, which is well and good and immediately alleviate your pain. But the problem is next time when you have some other things down the track, you'll be like, oh, I wish I had a platform so I can easily add another 20% of effort to unlock this use case. Instead of I need to build everything from scratch again, or need to find another point solution again. Right? So that is why I would highly recommend people to, when they look at it holistically, think of it like, hey, I'm buying a data lake, right? I don't buy it for a particular use case. I buy it for the future of all future use cases that potentially you will need. But yes, of course, you still need a solution to solve your immediate pain point.
Right.
But don't just be so narrow focused or tunnel vision and saying, oh, that's fine, just one point solution because it solved my pain point immediately, because that wouldn't solve your pain point over the long term.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Just got another question here from Navjeet. Is there an alignment of metaphor to data mesh principles?
I did be very careful about data mesh because I think either I'm going to be loved by people or hate by people when I mention that word. but data mesh is a good concept in my opinion, right? It is, I think, probably long term where the industry will evolve into. If you want to truly democratize your data ecosystem, guess what? It has to be distributed, right? You cannot centralize everything. The team will have to have a lot of freedom on their own, and you have to be able to collaborate with other people effectively. And in our opinion, when we read the first data mesh post that put out, it reads metadata everywhere. In my opinion, every picture you see is just like there's some layer in between that trying to link everything up together.
Yeah.
So you enable whether it's the API definition, blah blah blah, etc. Right. That layer is what? That layer to me, or at least to us, is metadata, right?
It would have to be. How else would it work?
Exactly, right? So I think it is an enabler, right, for that sort of thing. And then I think it is an enabler in general to open up your data ecosystem for collaboration. So data mesh absolutely sort of fit into that need as well. But is Metaphor the data mesh provider? No, the answer is no. We're not a data mesh provider. But will we be able to enable your data mesh over time in the long term? Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we
especially
will be
that there's the underlying piece in the data mesh too, where it's the federated governance that sort of undercuts all the. I mean, if you think about what data mesh, I mean, I always align it to where microservices were, way back in the day. It's exactly the same thing, but for data.
Absolutely. We actually say not just data mesh, like a lot of principles around like how we are building our product, or like the problems which you're seeing across work kind of came from the microservices world like a decade ago or like a few years ago, right? Like, and the solutions also have to like evolve in the similar direction, but like of course, like data has this unique thing which is different from the general services, right? Yeah.
Interesting. I have another friend of mine. Do you know Raghu Murthy from Data Coral? He was working on this paper called or article series on metadata first architecture. If you haven't, you might want to go check those out, and I can put you in contact. I think you guys might align quite well. He's one of the guys who helped create Hive back in the day, incidentally. So
nice.
Yeah, so bit of experience in the data space. That's awesome. So architecturally too, I want to ask you this. So I mean, you had Warehouse back in the day, and from what I could tell, that was kind of a batch first approach. But from what I can tell under the hood, DataHub Metaphor uses Kafka. Am I mistaken on that, or is it? Did you take more of a kind of a streaming first approach with your architecture?
So Metaphor is actually, in our opinion, is the next evolution of DataHub to a great extent. So our code is actually quite different from DataHub to a great extent because we want to make this cloud native, right? I mean, honestly, we are a SaaS company, so we're building a SaaS solution, right? So that is what we built. And this whole, batch or push versus pull, right? Batch versus streaming thing. We have it also solved inside of our Metaphor platform, right? So we actually support both. And then the reason behind that is, honestly, you will have system that is just more efficient to do batch, right? You can turn everything batch into stream and everything stream into batch, right? Both of them is turnable, but like it's just like you don't, try to turn everything into what it is not designed for, right? It just doesn't make sense sometimes. So in reality, actually, we're seeing a lot of cases when the metadata evolve a lot slower, right? Maybe it happens, for example, table schema, right? You don't expect them to change every hour, right? They probably change every once a week at most, or maybe
that would be frightening if it did, right?
Exactly, right? So for that sort of system, actually, batch is actually quite ideal, right? And then you can run it once a day, you can run it once a week, right? That's okay. I mean, you're not gonna miss anything by running it less frequently, right? But there are certain things obviously change very, very frequently, and that sort of stuff. And then if your application or use case actually depends on, up to the milliseconds accuracy of the metadata, then you absolutely need a stream-based system essentially in order to bring those in near real time, so to speak, right? So yeah, I think that is, once again, that sort of echo back to the platform piece as well, right? When you design it, if you think you're building a platform rather than building an application, all of these are consideration essentially, right? How do I manage to ingest metadata at scale, near real time if needed, or at scale batch if needed, right? You will think in that sort of direction rather than, oh, how do I build a pretty UI, or how do I build a good search and all that, right? Which you'll have to think, but it's like if you're building a platform, that wouldn't be your first concern essentially.
Might not be your first concern, but I'm kidding.
and like, just to add, right, like the like what we said, like we are thinking always from platform perspective, right? Like the current set of use cases, current set of things, maybe we can batch system we can get away with less complexity and stuff. But as the things evolve and you need a real-time processing system for both consumption, like, and providing solutions in real stream fashion, the platform should be capable to do that without like jumping up and down and like restructuring the whole thing, which is what we are like. Everything internal connections, we can change it into a full stream,
cool,
real-time system. Yeah,
that's really cool. And G has a follow-up question here. So Metaphor will enable provisioning of data products also once data products are cataloged.
This is okay. But do you want to jump in first? Okay.
So data products and like the aspects of like being cataloged, like the enabling of search and discovery and governance around it, like it follows the similar principles of the data assets, which physical assets and stuff. So the answer is yes. If you say enabling of provisioning of data products is an interesting aspect which we have to like not yet like got into. If you ask me like will it do it in the future, maybe answer is maybe. Yeah.
But just to give you some perspective, inside of LinkedIn, when we build DataHub, one of the many projects we work on in terms of collaboration is this provisioning piece, right? There is actually an internal provisioning system that was trying to do integration with DataHub. And there's actually also not just provisioning, right? There's also a separate project I was working on, essentially controlling the ETL pipeline based off the metadata that we have on the platform, right? Think of it as someone will basically, there will be some sort of system where they basically specify what kind of data they want to create and whatnot. And then there will be a separate system that basically talk to us and say, hey, I want to grab that piece of metadata. I want to know what data I should copy or create derivation from and all that. So there is absolutely that sort of piece going on as well. It's not exactly provision, but actually pretty close in that sense. It is essentially almost at that point, it's almost a data dev ops tool, if you will. I don't know what's the best way to classify it.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So that's interesting. I suppose at LinkedIn, you probably had a lot of data products, so to speak, right?
Yeah. We often joke about how at LinkedIn we have 2 million data sets, but we only have 200 data sets. So 2 million is the grand total. Of course, that's not many of it, but there's only 200 that matters. Right? Everything else is kind of derived from it. And like, once again, that's kind of the flip side or the ugly side of uncontrolled growth, right, in a company. Yes, it's democratization, but the flip side of it is you end up having this organic growth and not controlled.
And this is very similar pattern which is showing up in our research across all the companies, surprisingly, like all the way from like very big companies to like even a smaller company as well, right? Like showing the symptoms are very similar.
Interesting. I bet so. Got a question here from Sunny. One of the reasons why data governance projects fail is they choose an expensive tool and focus more on the technical aspects. After a while, business sponsors don't see any advantage of the spend. What do you guys think we need to do differently?
Very good question, Sunny. So I think this is one of the aspects which we were talking about in our like recent blog post as well, right? Like when we created or worked on like previous experience around DataHub, right? Like we always thought this is a problem around technical metadata. So we built the tool explicitly around for mostly data engineers, right? And if we look deeper, like yes, they did solve data engineers to kind of answer the problems and like explore on their own. It's a great tool. But they also need a very similar tool for their customers who happen to be the business users of the data, right? Like their data customers are the business users to kind of use it and engage, but the tool is not presented or at least like speaking the language of the business users. So what essentially the metaphor is attempting is that like you don't require two separate systems or two separate tools, one for business users and one for technical users like data engineers. And it's one tool. And the second thing is it has to act as a bridge between these two languages, right? Like these two contexts. So that's the most essential thing, which can help them more self-serve and more collaborate and understand that, like what we call it as the technical speak versus the business speak, and like translate between those two things. So there are various aspects of like bringing business context and social context around how business users are using it, and like how the technical users are we bring in and like into Metaphor to solve this problem. Hope that answers, Sunny.
Yeah, I mean, what are some suggestions too for, I think, getting like everyone has a certain amount of social, political capital in their office, right? How would you suggest spending it wisely when trying to advocate for data governance solutions?
So actually, I can try to help, try to jump in first, and then Pardhu can probably add more points afterward, right? So I think absolutely with something like this, you don't want to go all out in one go. I think we've seen too many cases where people are very idealistic and say, hey, we want to have one solution, and then we just put everybody in the room and then problem will be solved magically, right? The answer is no, that will never solve the problem for you. And you're going to waste all your political capital along the way if you do that, essentially, right? So try to start small, and also find a tool that will really help you to grow and then expand over time, right? Like what Pardhu mentioned just now, right? We do truly believe that if you want to have true democratization of the system, your tool itself also need to be democratizable, essentially, so to speak, right? And one of our principles when it comes to this sort of thing is there's always going to be two sides of the story. There's got to be one side where, yes, it's governed, 3 persons in the company have right to update the thing, right? Your dictionary example, for example, right? Because this is critical, we don't expect anyone in the company to randomly change those definitions, right? There will definitely be that piece of the story. There will also be the other piece of the story, which is more like crowdsourced, if you think about it, right? Hey, I don't care how, the whole company define revenue, but my department, this is the revenue definition we work with, right? Then this is whenever we compute for our exact, this is how you should do it and all that. You want to enable those people to self-serve and help themselves, right? And then build up those knowledge base essentially over time for them. And yes, you also want to be able to link that into the global definition and say, hey, look, yes, there's revenue, but there's 20 variants of revenue, and here are the 20 variants, right, for example. So I think a successful product will need to deal with both. And what we're seeing sort of currently lacking in the market is most of them are either super focused on just the governance piece or super focused on just like pure random crowdsourced approach, right? They're not hitting the right balance. The right balance is you actually try to get the strengths from both, right? One is, yes, it's high quality, very well defined, hardly ever change over time. But it doesn't scale, right? You cannot put the whole company on that. Right? Whereas the other side is, hey, look, crowdsource, yes, we can get a lot of people to do this. It's very scalable, but there's always the caveat that say, hey, look, your mileage may vary, right? Because it's not governed, right? So you kind of need to have those two blend together nicely in order to really scale this governance piece. You cannot be just doing the extreme one or the other, because neither will work, in our opinion.
For sure. Also, how do you know if a data governance project is successful?
That is a very good question, but I think a good indicator is, I mean, this is probably a very rough indicator, but if you have a bunch of exec in a room talking about quarterly planning and all that, and then they don't fight over definition, then you'll probably be successful at that point already. Or when someone presents something, and then someone actually, hey, how did you come up with that thing there, right?
Right.
And then there's actually a very well, documented process of, hey, this is why, right? This is why this number is a bit different, or this metric is a bit different, because when we consider this, we filter out all the, first-time user or whatever, right? So you have that everything well documented, so people don't even ask that question. They just go in and say, oh, let me read about this. Okay, fine, I get it. Right? Almost like Wikipedia, if you think about it. Right? You can just send that to people and say, hey, look, let's not argue about this. It's clearly documented here. This is how it works. And if you don't know, now you do. Right? So that's kind of I think, in my opinion, that would be a good indicator of a governance process.
It's like reducing friction to make the right decision. Then might be an indicator.
Did you say friction?
Yeah, friction. Yeah.
It's not, right? Like, actually, interestingly, you also want to reduce the friction to kind of self-serve this information as much as possible. The less number of hops you have to jump to get to the right information is kind of an indicator of the success of such a project as well, right? Like, yeah, you want the data sets and the governance project to be successful, but doesn't necessitate like people to wait days to even like start using the data or like making the data decision. That's another indicator as well. Yeah.
Actually, I'm gonna put myself in danger of giving an analogy here.
Nice. Let's do this.
Probably a bad analogy, but there used to be a time when software engineer, write code without version control system because there was not. Right? There was no SVN, there was no Git. Right? It was a very painful time because we email each other patches, or actually maybe copy them into floppy disk and send it to people. Right? I don't know, right? That was a terrible time. Why? Because first of all, it's super hard to collaborate with people, but not just that, right? There's no ledger or record of what happened, right? So think about it. Nobody ever actually asked about who wrote this line and how did it come about, right? What was the change associated with it now, right? People don't do that, right? Because they just go to GitHub or whatever tool they use and then just trace that thing themselves, right? They don't need to ask people in order to understand all that thing. I think data is severely lacking an equivalence tool, right? Because now it's like everybody was just looking at the table, looking at the end result, the numbers, they scratch their heads, say, well, how did that come about, right? And then someone will have to come in and manually narrate the whole story for you and say, hey, look, this is what happened. These are the 10 steps I've taken in order to get to here, right? And then obviously that doesn't scale over time because what if that person leave the company, right? And so that, I think that's sort of similar analogy here. I think our hope is that Metaphor can be that tool to help you to basically record down everything. And then that way, because nobody likes documentation, right? That's the reality of it. But if you document it and able to keep up with it in a very scalable form, right? Then that's great. It's kind of like Git, right? So nobody ever argue, hey, I shouldn't write in the description for my Git anymore, because they know there's a lot of value in doing that. So,
right, that makes a lot of sense. And kind of on a related note here, Ken Smith has a question. He says studies are showing that ad hoc BI requests are on the rise as stakeholders want quick answers to changing circumstances like COVID and travel. But many of these requests don't have the scale or clear ROI to warrant a new BI dashboard. How can we better handle these ad hoc queries?
This is a very excellent question, Ken. Like this definitely COVID and like this whole remote system has kind of increased the number of like ad hoc requests and things, and like even made like the turnaround time for this request to be like much longer or harder to answer these things. That's where we believe that expecting the single data engineering team to answer all these questions is not the right thing. So these data engineering teams often end up like, of course, they have like limited knowledge around like which exact dashboard, which exact data set to use and stuff. But there is a lot of potential in leveraging the knowledge across the consumers, which is the data stakeholders. That's where Metaphor also focuses on like capturing the context and like making it more self-servable and exchangeable between the data consumers, so that the data engineering team is not on hook for every single request and answering every single thing, which could be completely leveraged among themselves. And also like leveraging existing knowledge and stuff like kind of also helps in building more consistent data reporting or dashboarding on the BI side as well, and like leveraging existing sources as well.
Yeah, I think there's certainly vendor trying to solve this holy grail of, hey, business user, just completely self-serve yourself, magically typing, doing some magic NLP, and then you just type in a couple words and then it will write a query for you, create a dashboard and all that. I think the reality is we're probably still a little bit far from that, even given the advancement in AI, ML and all that. And so in the short term, I don't think these sort of ad hoc requests will go away. That's kind of the unfortunate fact, right? But I think Metaphor or vendors in our area certainly try to help to reduce that. So instead of you running around trying to find how to create something to satisfy those ad hoc, they should be readily available to you, right? So you can say, hey, look, let me quickly find first of all, have I ever created a similar dashboard before? Can I just tweak that? Or, hey, did anyone in my team create something similar to that I can tweak, and so on and so forth? So that's help you to reduce the amount of work rather than reduce the number of requests, because I think that's going to be hard, to be honest.
I would also view the number of ad hoc requests as a good thing in a lot of ways, because that means people care.
Yeah.
Like the kiss of death is when nobody's asking you for anything at all. So self-serve, I think, is a great ideal, but I would be careful about that, especially as a reporting department or an analytical department, right? Because either you're working on stuff where people are have very custom requests. I don't think those go away. But if nobody's asking for anything, right? Might not be around for that long.
Here's another bad analogy, right? So you can probably tell there's a theme going on with our company. The company is called Metaphor, so we keep coming up with new metaphor here. So think about it, right? Even with all the great financial tools you have in the company, right? When you try to report to an auditor or some external party and all that, guess what? It's not going to be one button click and say, hey, look, here's the final result, right? Someone's going to really go in there and then scrutinize every single thing and put their name against the final result, say, yes, I approve this because I audited it, I look at it. Right. Similar story here with data. Yes, of course, there will be cases where that is completely necessary, but there will be cases where it's less so. But I think ultimately from kind of a decision maker point of view, unless the tool is just so smart, like super AI, superhuman intelligence, right? They're just not going to trust themselves doing that right thing there, right? They want someone who's an expert to put their name against it and say, yes, I approve, this is right. Even if it's already existing dashboard, they want that person to come in and say, yes, this is still valid, this is all good. So I think that piece is very hard to be replaced. Even if the tool is there, I think they will always be like, oh, we want to make sure that we're making an important data decision. Someone has actually vetted this, other than me, who's not an expert in all these data stuff. Yeah, so.
And just to add one more point there, even if the whole democratization has created a lot of self-serve and like created a lot of assets, Metaphor also looks at it. The beauty of connected metadata is that like Metaphor also helps data engineering teams to understand over a period of time which of these dashboards or data assets or data products created have actual ROI and actual usage over a period of time, or is it just like a one-time thing, and like help engineers to like kind of consolidate the resources over a period of time and just like focus where there is actual usage, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's way better than what I used to do back in the day, which was just I would randomly turn off reports to people, and if you cry,
we did that too.
Yeah, you do that.
That is a very common method.
It's very common.
Generally doesn't end well, but it's a common method.
You send like broadcast messages. Hey, 1 month, 29 days, 28 days, we're going to shut it off. And like, guess what? The next day, who turned off this report?
It happens.
Yeah.
But, I mean, in lieu of anything else, it's kind of what you got to do. Because as I mean, Ken, he followed up here with some stats here. He said his study showed 40 to 50% of requests are ad hoc. They come in weekly. Exactly the whole point, right? So, but ad hoc has a weird way of becoming normal and scheduled. We've all seen it happen. We've all done this before. So
yeah, I think something like this, like the way we kind of enable like the kind of use cases and all coming on top of the things and capturing those things around the data set, right? Like all of this ad hoc requests around the data sets is also kind of metadata, right? Important metadata, which should guide you to understand and guide you to like what other like base tables do you need to bring, or what changes do you need to do in the modeling to kind of reduce these ad hoc questions into the future, right? Like, so that's where this is, I believe like all this kind of metadata is important to capture, like along with the data product, to understand how to morph or how to like bring in changes into your data system itself, right? Like data modeling itself.
Actually, there's a very good point here as well, right? The reason why ad hoc is so annoying is not because it's ad hoc. Yes, it is annoying because it's ad hoc. But I think the most annoying thing is you'd be like, didn't I do this a while back? Right? Like if you're scratching your head, wait a second, I thought I filled a very similar request a while back. But because it's ad hoc, right? Guess what? You're not going to document it yourself. And you're not documenting it, guess what? You're going to do it again. Right? So people resort to like, I've seen people resort to like text files on their desktop or whatever, right? Just basically just put a like random, like basically query there and say, oh, I know I might need it in the future.
Yep.
And the reason why they do it there is because there's no good tool to capture it, right? Where else would you put that thing, right? Would you put it in a company wiki page? That sounds weird, right? Would you put it in like the main data catalog? That sounds weird, right? So we want to make sure that we provide a system where you can capture that sort of thing, right? It's building your knowledge. That is literally what it is. You're building your knowledge along the way. You don't want to lose those knowledge. But if you don't have a good place to put it, guess what? You're going to lose it over time. That's just the way it is.
So do you guys capture like the context of the type of request that's being asked?
Not just the context around. Yeah, actually, we kind of capture the context around any use case that is coming around that, not just necessarily just a request, any use case that is coming around your data product. We strongly believe without the context, people do not have clarity around like whether they can use it for something or not, or if this is the right data set for that use case. So they will still, how much of a technical metadata you provide, they'll still come back to the data engineering team and ask like, hey, I think this is, but is this still true? Like, or can you validate? That's where we kind of built a lot of things into the product to answer the problem. Yeah.
Actually, I'll give you a very good example. I think a lot of people can relate to this. So a typical ask about a data catalog product is, can I add column level description? That's kind of repeating over and over again from our customer, right? But when you really dig into it and say, what do you really want to achieve by adding the column level description, right? The answer is actually, because we want to know how we use this thing, right? That's kind of the real thing that's driving it, saying that, hey, we want to know how to use this table, and that's why we need a column level description. But if you dig further into it, it's like, can you really find one use case for one table all the time? The answer is no, right? Certainly, if the most popular table, there's going to be 100,000 use cases, and they're all going to be very, very different, right? And then at that point, when you ask them, do you still want to have one definition for your column? Then people are like, oh, maybe not. Right? That doesn't make sense anymore, right? How can I even come up with a definition that works for every use case? It's just not gonna work. And also to make it worse, right? Most use cases, they use a couple of columns. Very few of them only use one column, right? So when you describe that use case, you don't describe it just saying, oh, in isolation, this column means that column means that. You want to describe it in a way saying, hey, look, if you want to solve this use case, take these 3 columns, join with that table's 5 column, blah, 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 etc., right? And then filter based on this. That's kind of the description you want to give for the use case, not column level description, right? So that's, once again, I think trying to capture that knowledge in a way that really serve what the user wants is hard. And that's why most products kind of fail, because the default engineering type of thinking is, oh, why don't we just add column level description? Sounds like an easy enough thing to do. Yeah.
That's really interesting. What about stuff like semi-structured data? Like, how often do you encounter that as sort of a first-class citizen that you have to deal with? Like maybe JSON or Mongo documents or something?
I think it depends on the maturity of the company, right? So in the early stage, everybody's just data warehouse, right? And then of course, yes, data warehouse are very capable of storing unstructured data nowadays. But still, when you talk about data warehouse, most of the time you're talking about just structured data. But as the company mature, or maybe because they're in a special industry, right? That can also come into play. But they start introducing unstructured data. They might bring in a data lake, or they might want to stick those things into a data warehouse and whatnot. That's when, those things start surfacing up. And the company we're targeting right now, most of the time, they might say, hey, look, we had a couple of those things, right? Maybe there's some event that comes in from Kafka or whatever, and then get dumped into some bucket somewhere. There's some bit of that, but that's a small part of our entire data ecosystem. And our real pain point is not that yet, right? Yes, it will become a pain point later, but for me, I need to know what's going on in my warehouse to start with, because BI is a mess, right? So yeah, that's kind of the thing we hear most of the time from customers that are, like, let's say, mid-market segment, right? Slightly smaller company. But yeah, once you get into enterprise, absolutely, it's like every enterprise has a lake. Every enterprise has tons of unstructured data.
Interesting. Cool. And you guys, kind of rewinding, you guys released something recently?
Yeah, we launched. We were working on like we talked about like the cloud native SaaS product, and for the last 1 year we added a lot of key features which we believe are going to the biggest gaps in, like, especially the adoption piece of of the data catalog or the data search and discovery solution in a company across like technical and business users as well. So we the product was finally built and like was ready for like actual production deployments, and we launched the product like 3 weeks ago.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, congrats. It's always a nice feeling. So,
thank you.
And of course, a plug, if you're interested in finding out more, we have a request demo button on our website. So click on that if you want to find out more.
That's awesome. Well, cool. I mean, yeah, kind of wrapping up, like, how would people find out more about Metaphor and both of you as well?
Please, we are very actively posting on our social media channels. Like, do follow us on our LinkedIn page, and also add your information to our request demo aspects of the website. Like, we will send like any new information and things. And if you are interested in with this problem space, even if it is building towards the future, do chat with us. We definitely love chatting with the data practitioners. We learn a lot from every single chat, like every single side of the company, how it is evolving. Please get in touch on metaphor.io.
Yeah, and we both of us obviously on LinkedIn. You can find us, ping us directly if you will. Twitter as well. If you're a Twitter person, we also on Twitter. You can find us there. And the company page, like what Pardhu mentioned, is also a good source of subscribing to, continuous update on what we think, how we're thinking about this problem, and what kind of solution are we proposing to solve them.
That's awesome. It's exciting to see the evolution in this space too. I feel like it's a space that's been very stodgy for a bit. I hate to use that word, but it's just I would say it's good there's people in here shaking this up right now, and it needs to happen too, especially as we point out earlier, things like data mesh, and other evolutions of that, I'm sure, right? It's going to be a metadata first world we're getting into. I'd say more than we are right now, which I would say we're kind of at ground zero for a lot of this stuff, frankly. So
yeah, once again, going back to the same analogy about data lake, I think we are in the beginning of that, where people start thinking, oh, I can see some value of getting these things into one place and then building use case on top. But I think later on it will become, oh, are you not doing it? Why are you not doing it? It's
right.
a question at that point, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same stuff we saw in software development back in the day, right? Like testing,
absolutely.
Right, and all the other stuff that's now table stakes. If you aren't doing it, like, you're crazy, and you would never join a team that was doing crazy things. Well, maybe you would. I don't know. Depends how much excitement you want in your life. But yeah, it's fun to talk to you guys. I think you have a really good I think it's hard-won experience, and also just I think really good foresight as to kind of where the industry is going too. So it's always fun to chat with you guys. So to be back on someday, and maybe you'll speak at my meetup soon. Who knows? For people who are not subscribed to our YouTube, check us out at Ternary Data. Smash the like button. This video will also be on there and LinkedIn, but YouTube's probably, I think, a better way to look at the historical footage. It's also a podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And subscribe to our newsletter at ternarydata.com. And we'll check you out next week. I think it's just Matt and I next week. So Matt and I have not actually done a show in a while. He couldn't make it today. He's en route to Manhattan right now. So you get me and the Metaphor guys. So, but it's almost as good. Anytime. Awesome. Well, thanks to the audience. Great questions. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week. So take care.
Yeah.